we have the week's top news in science, technology. Thank you for joining me. And this week, the summary of the stories, the top news story, since this is the time of COP27 and climate concerns, is we have 10 charts, the climate crisis explained in 10 charts. And in technology, I'm not sure what kind of story this is, if it's a tragedy or a comedy, but Elon Musk now says that under his brilliant new management, Twitter may go out of business. So I'm not sure how good that $44 billion purchase was. I guess it's just change for him. And in the environment, this is a story of environmental success. And an Arkansas school district turned its savings using solar power into better pay for the teachers. So I think that's a real good system solution. And in physics, I have a story from a group that calls themselves the Optimist's Edge. And this story is how launching into the space will be 99.9% cheaper. That's a lot cheaper, and it's going to mean an enormous difference in how we use it. And then in biology, we have a very definite first, and here they have made an entire genome from scratch to support a new genetic code that's different from all the other DNA and genetic code that have been on this planet for the last 4 billion years. And the result is a living organism. And in anthropology, it looks like our ancestors first developed human-like brains 1.7 million years ago. So we are on a long path of this mental development ourselves. And in health, another story that could be kind of a synthetic biology story, and for the first time ever, people are getting transfusions from lab-grown blood cells. So it's not lab-grown meat that we're talking about now, it's lab-grown blood. So they're making headway. And so to go on to the stories, then the climate crisis explained in 10 charts. And the first chart is a chart of the problem of rising CO2 in the atmosphere. Let me get an image up there for us. And here, this is CO2 levels for the last 1,000 years. And you see the CO2 level was basically pretty constant until about 100 years ago, and then has started to climb significantly since then, really since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. And now it is at its highest for 4 million years. And one of the causes for and this fossil fuel burning you see starting in the early 1800s with the rise of the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution so far has been driven by fossil fuels, and the biggest percentage of this is actually from coal. And uh, the fossil fuel burning curve looks a lot like the CO2 in the atmosphere curve. Another issue has been the felling of forests for timber and cattle and soy and palm oil. This has been a big contributor to CO2 emissions. And along with this has been methane emissions. They don't have this data back as far as some of the other stuff, only about 40 years. And in that 40 years, the methane concentration has increased by about 30%. And methane, as we know, is a real powerful greenhouse gas, and emissions are increasing faster than any time in these last 40 years. And these come from farming, especially cattle, as Norman will tell us, and also fossil fuel extraction, landfill, and warming wetlands. They're also from the warming permafrost on the northern half of the planet. Then, uh, with all of this rise, and if you look at the global temperature rise for the first 100 years of the Industrial Revolution, it wasn't that bad. It's hard to see the trend, but really, since World War II, then the trend is unmistakable, and uh, now we see it to the point where it is noticeable in terms of climate and extremes in weather. Uh, More energy in the atmosphere makes extreme weather events more frequent and more intense, and that's what we've experienced recently. This last year is a good. Then another consequence is rising sea levels, and sea levels are inexorably rising as ice on land melts and as the hotter oceans expand. And they say with a temperature rise of 2 degrees C, 1 in 5 people in the world will be displaced because their cities are being submerged. So this is a significant problem. Then there has also been the shrinking of the ice caps at both poles, and the ice caps have reduced in their volume almost a half of what they were 50 years ago. Then the upsides here, and there are some upsides. One of them is that wind and solar energy is really moving fast, and huge cost drops have helped renewable energy become the cheapest energy in many places. And this reduction in cost is expected to continue. So that's going to continue to be some benefit. Notice this says even in 2050, we'll still be burning a lot of coal, though. And since coal is the main culprit, I think we have to figure out how to reduce the coal way past what is being forecast there. And then the another thing that is exceptional is this growing global fleet of electric cars and vans. It's still relatively small in terms of the total number of vehicles, but sales are growing fast, and governments are setting end dates for the sale of petrol and diesel vehicles. And of course, electric cars are cheaper to run, meaning that as the costs come down, they will dominate because they are the most economical way to get around. And the element is battery costs. The cost of batteries is plummeting, and there still are new technologies coming in and being developed. We, though, need to further develop other technologies that has longer storage duration, such as green hydrogen and uh, things like this. But we see with these changes the future of the combination of renewable power and uh, battery backup as a reservoir. This is becoming more and more possible. And so that's kind of the situation we're in a nutshell. Any comments?
Well, the chart that concerns me is the solar, wind versus coal. And you mentioned that in 2050, they still predict we're burning just about as much coal as we are today.
Yes.
And that's concerning. I thought that would have shown more of a decline, but I don't know.
Right. I thought it would show more of a decline as well. And it does show a decline, but it's like it's 20% less, not 50% less or 100% less.
Right, right.
And since coal has been the primary contributor of CO2 in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, it's a it's a big deal.
Yeah. Concerning.
Okay, the next story is a technology story, and this technology story is actually about a person, uh, Elon Musk. And Elon Musk has now succeeded with his purchase of Twitter, and I think that is 4 companies that he is CEO of. And uh, even he is suggesting that maybe he has bitten off more than he can chew. And so, of course, with Twitter, uh, there were the recent emails to his new employees where he told them soon they may be out of a job. And he said that Twitter needs to be monetized or else. And without significant subscription revenue, he says there's a good chance that Twitter will not survive the upcoming economic downturn and that bankruptcy isn't out of the question. And Musk has been making sweeping changes, very unpopular, both with his employees and with his advertisers. He's laid off half of Twitter's staff, and he's laid off 80% of their contractors. And Twitter now is in financial trouble. Part of Musk's deal to finance Twitter is to take out loans, and he has to pay $1 billion annually in interest on those loans. And he is facing real headwinds from advertisers because advertisers, unless the Twitter platform is relatively clean of kind of junk content that its advertisers find objectionable and don't want their ads to be next to that content. Uh, the advertising revenue has been cut in half since he has taken over Twitter. So the money problems he has are even worse. And I'm sure you've all heard about one of the ways he was going to monetize it is start charging $8 a month for the little blue check, which used to mean that you're verified and you are who you say you are. Now, what the blue check meant once he did this was that you could pay him $8. And there were many people imitating famous people and companies and making many garbage tweets. They paid their $8 and can imitate whoever they want to imitate. And this has been a disaster for him. And we don't know how it's going to come out. And maybe Twitter will go bankrupt. Some people are theorizing that he wants to turn the whole thing into some uh, advertising place where he kind of sells subscription because all the worthwhile content and things like that, and then he will advertise and take a little piece of everything, so he's going to turn it into a money platform. It makes me wonder what he was thinking when he was going about doing this in the first place. And he's supposed to be such a smart guy and supposed to understand marketing so well. But from what I've seen, this looks potentially like the most colossal failure of the last 20 or 30 years.
I agree. It sounds like a disaster happening over the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Yes,
Plus, it's taken his energy away from Tesla and SpaceX, I think, and
yes,
and they're experiencing some issues that he's not spending his time on. He's
that's
trying
right.
to fix Twitter. So I don't know. I don't use social media, so I don't. I stay off of those things.
Right.
I think the reports have been understated regarding Twitter because I think that application of AI, and Musk is further ahead than anybody, will change the structure of Twitter. It won't take such a large human staff.
Perhaps.
Yeah, right. If they can get it implemented before it goes under.
And get it implemented where they don't have the depth of technical skills that they had a month ago. Now,
Yeah.
it sounds like this is causing Musk other problems. Didn't he sell a bunch of Tesla stock recently to
Correct. Yeah.
generate some cash?
Yeah. It's leaking fast.
And, I worked in Silicon Valley and I knew a bunch of these guys at the top of these companies that uh, most of them thought that they were the smartest thing ever. And I was not convinced that they were all as smart as they thought they were.
I've seen that as well.
And one of the things that they didn't give credit to was the fortune of good timing. Because it's wonderful to have these brilliant ideas, but you have to have them at the right time for the market where they can succeed. Because I certainly have known other people who are genuinely brilliant who were, like 20 years ahead of their time. And so they went nowhere and ended up their life disappointed with the lack of recognition that they got. Anyway,
Yeah.
just the problems of our era. Now, the next story is about technology and the environment. And this was in Batesville, Arkansas, just 17 miles west of the state's largest coal-fired power plant. There is a solar array at a local high school, and it's having an unconventional impact of boosting teachers' pay. In 2017, they conducted an energy audit, and the energy audit found that the district's annual utility bills were more than $600,000, which is a lot for a school system that often is strapped for cash. And because they were strapped for cash, they were having a real problem retaining their teachers. That same audit also revealed that the school district could save at least $2.4 million over 20 years if it outfitted the high school with more than 1,400 solar panels. And they did that, and now, after 3 years, they've generated enough savings to transform the district's $250,000 budget deficit into a $1.8 million surplus, and a major chunk is going into teachers' pay, giving pay raises of an average between $2,000 to $3,000 a year per educator, and so now they're in the top quartile of teacher pay in the state of Arkansas, and they don't have any problem attracting and retaining teachers. Now, altogether in the U.S., there are more than 7,000 schools across the U.S. that are using solar to save on energy. This is about 16% of the U.S. school districts. And if every U.S. public school used 100% solar power, it would drive emission reductions that would be equivalent to closing 18 of those nasty coal-fired power plants. There are challenges to doing this, of course. There are policy issues, financial issues, and some communities are concerned about using a non-traditional energy source. Now, one part of this that has been key around the country, not at this particular school district, but around the country, is companies that are offering purchase agreements to finance, build, and maintain the solar power. The company agrees to do it. The school district pays the developer at a rate. It's a lower rate that they would pay the utility, and this lets them save money now with no upfront costs and receive immediate benefits. Of those 7,000 schools that have been provided solar power, about 80% of them, 4 out of 5, use this kind of financing. And I'm sure one of the reasons they use this kind of financing is uh, schools are strapped for money and they don't have a big capital budget. So here, it's actually a fairly clever idea to use the uh, aggressive financial people to make a deal and turn what was a monthly cost into maybe a monthly revenue.
Sounds like a great business plan to me.
Yeah, me too. Me
I mean,
too.
compared to we just talked about Twitter, and this sounds great.
Yes, that's right. And this sounds, the deals that I know work in the long term are the deals where everybody benefits.
Yeah, yeah, excellent.
Uh-huh. So anyway, good thinking. Now, the space story this week is uh, from the Optimist's Edge. I think the name of the source tells you a little bit about their slant, but they say in just a few years, launching rockets into space will become 99.9% cheaper, which is a lot cheaper. And if you look at it, launching rockets and their payloads into space is expensive. It used to be very expensive, but soon it'll be pretty cheap. Launching the space shuttle costs more than $50,000 per kilo. Then Europe's workhorse, the Ariane, is $9,000 a kilo, already a lot cheaper. But the cost leader, of course, is SpaceX. Their Falcon 9, 1 kilo costs you 2,600, which is pretty dramatically cheaper than 50,000 or 9,000. And the Falcon Heavy is even less costly at $1,400 per kilo. These Falcon rockets are the cheapest because so much of them is reusable. And so the cost that they're able to offer is a sign of just what a good idea making these launch vehicles recoverable and reusable was, because it has brought the cost down dramatically. But
And the Starship launches, the SpaceX Starship launches have a much lower cost
that's
per kilo.
exactly. So the SpaceX can deliver 100 tons per launch cost of $1 million each. That's $10 a kilo. And that's how they got this 99.9% reduction, is from $50,000 a kilo to $10 a kilo. It's a pretty dramatic reduction. And this is going to make things enormously different in space. We'll be able to launch more and bigger things into space. We'll go from a few thousand satellites to perhaps millions of satellites. I don't know how you get through them all without an accident, and part of at that cost, then they anticipate in space enormous structures where thousands and eventually millions of people live in space. Because, if it's $10 a kilo, then for $1,000, you can launch me into space and get rid of me forever.
But more importantly, it portends the mining of asteroids and planets
Exactly.
for materials that are scarce on Earth.
Yes. And not only will there be the mining of the asteroids, but there also will be using what they mine and turning it into the final product in space, and then using what they mine from space to build in space, because that is a lot cheaper than sending it up even in the Falcon X and the Super Heavy. And also with Musk's plan to establish a second home in Mars, to really be a sustainable civilization there, they think we'd need 1 million people on Mars. And unless you get the cost down, it just would be too expensive to get 1 million people on Mars. Again, if it's $10 a kilo, then it becomes something that you could imagine happening. And
there are operations that are much more cost effective in a vacuum, or that require a vacuum.
oh, yes,
And
indeed.
that's what we have in space.
Yes, yes. And also, again, I remember from the sci-fi the idea of using essentially mass drivers, big slingshots to throw stuff from one orbiting location to another orbiting location, or even into the Earth's atmosphere. So getting stuff down from space is pretty cheap.
Right. Now they were mentioning the price per kilo at what was $10.
Yes.
Now, I didn't get time to read the article, but do they differentiate between, a satellite versus a human? Because, a human, I don't think you can get it that cheap. You've got to, it's just not weight. It's, air, capsules, and safety, and all of the
But
above.
that's still what the Starship is designed for, humans.
Oh, okay.
So,
But Daryl is right. It's not just the weight of the people, it's the weight of the support systems.
right,
Right.
right. So it has to be food in ways to generate air and water.
Right. And yeah, it's like to me, it's got to cost a lot more to put a human in space than a piece of metal satellite.
Right. Well, especially if you're going to Mars, because it's going to take, the transit time is going to be a while. I'm not sure how long it would be. You would know
Six
that more
six
than.
months 6 months at the best.
Okay, so you have your 1,000 people and you have to feed them for 6 months.
Yep.
So there's a lot of overhead.
Correct.
Unless you can raise stuff in Mars, if you can learn to do that, have greenhouses and things of this sort.
Yep.
But there may be intermediate locations before Mars.
True.
Well, the moon is the only one we have now.
Yeah. That's the next stop, is the moon, and building a base on there. Let's see if we can survive on the moon. That's 250,000 miles away.
That's right. It's right in our neighborhood.
Get up there in 2 days.
But anyway, for me, just the idea of the drastic cost reductions of putting stuff in space uh, excites my imagination, because when it becomes as cheap as they're talking about, then essentially the cost becomes trivial.
Right? You can make a lot more plans in the future. It's like, oh, we can do that now.
That's right.
10 years ago, no.
And the extraction of scarce minerals
Right.
is damn attractive.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so now I have a biology story, and this one is really uh, synthetic biology, I think, hitting it out of the park. Right now, every living organism on Earth uses pretty much the same genetic codes. And because of this, genes get transferred between species all the time and function and evolve in their new hosts. And the genetic structure also allows things like viruses to come in and essentially hijack the genetic system of the cell and use it to reproduce their self. And now, for the first time, an entire genome has been made from scratch and redesigned such that it doesn't use the genetic code in the same way that all the other organisms on the planet do. And when they started this, they were wondering, can you really yank out an organism's entire genome, replace it with a synthetic one where the rules are different, and have it actually live? And what this experiment has shown is yes. So they took an E. coli bacteria, which has about 5 million base pairs, and were able to reconstruct it in its entirety. So it abandons the traditional genetic code and follows a new one. And at the end of it, there was a new living organism that used a non-standard genetic code. And this non-standard genetic code means that it can't exchange functioning genes with any other organisms or be attacked by viruses. It exists on its own genetic island. One problem they have with this is what to call it. Is it a new species of bacteria? Is it another kingdom, biological kingdom? I think it's more than a new species since it uses a different system. Now, when they think about this, they have ideas of one immediate kind of practical application is, now bacteria are used to make organic chemicals and pharmaceutical proteins in fermenters. And the E. coli are one that uses it. But this new bacteria has zero risk of phages, of virus infections. And the virus infections are terrible for these places where the fermenters, where you're trying to grow something. One particle from the virus sneaks into the biomanufacturing plant and can close the whole thing and require it to be taken offline to clean it and sterilize it again. But with this organism, that's not going to happen. Viruses don't work against it anymore. And basically, the trick they've done, DNA has the four letters A, G, C, and T that are coded into the DNA, and combinations of three of these make codons, and the codons are the thing that then the mRNA translates directly into proteins, and this is the fundamental mechanism. The mRNA codons, though, use an adapter molecule that's called transfer RNA. And what they did is make changes to how the transfer RNA works. So these codons that produce one thing in the conventional living organism produce a different thing in the revised bacteria. And after they were through this, they used these changes against the entire genome, the 5 million base pairs, and came up with a new entity. And the new entity is not only alive, but it grows. It grows about half as fast as the old E. coli did, but it's living and it grows. There are lots of things that worked in E. coli that don't work with this new system because within the cell the mechanisms are different. But again, here, a virus that is able to infect E. coli just gets tossed aside and has no effect on this new organism. One of the things this does is, there are lots of worries that we've heard about from transgenic organisms getting loose. And they think this organism can't get loose because to all other organisms on Earth, the genes are just pure gobbledygook. So it's like they speak a different language. And so if we use them for any kind of industrial process, they're impervious to viruses that can shut the place down. And the people who are doing this work say it's actually pretty amazing. In just 80 years, which isn't very long, we've gone from knowing nothing about how genetics works. We discovered DNA 80 years ago, and now we understand it well enough where we're able to introduce a new life form by redesigning the genetic code in a way that has never occurred naturally on Earth. So again, I think, I've been speaking for years about one of the revolutions that we're going through now, which is a biological revolution. And this is an example of what we're able to do. And I think it's pretty amazing.
What would be the ultimate goal of this research? Like to create an alien life form or something?
Well, first it's research and they're just trying to figure out how stuff works. But here they figured out an immediate application for this is again, bacteria are presently used in bioreactors to produce chemicals and proteins and things like this. And these are all fragile systems because they can easily be infected by viruses and shut the whole process down. And this stuff, since it doesn't speak the same language that a virus does is impervious to that kind of danger.
Right.
But at another level, I know these are scientists and these are guys who are curious people and they just want to figure out how things work. And one of the things I know about figuring out how things work is you go screw around with it for a bit, and see what you can do. And I think that is part of the spirit.
Right.
You also need some very special equipment that was not available until recently. I'm thinking of my grandson who was involved in taking cancer cells apart, how these work and how they react. And they're literally taking the cells apart piece by piece. I mean, it's unbelievably small pieces they work with. But, you have the optical equipment, or I don't know what the hell they're using, but anyway, it's unbelievably expensive. And it wasn't available until about 10 years ago.
Right.
Anyway, it's amazing work. I do know if I had a kid that was in middle school or something like that at this time, I would try to get them interested in biology. Maybe I would buy them one of those $10 100x microscopes so they could start looking around in the world and just start to get curious and excited.
Right. Cardboard, wasn't it cardboard microscope?
Yes, yes.
Right. Right.
Card, and it used origami to create the space between the two lenses.
Right.
These are clever guys.
Yeah.
Okay, now for the human story, the anthropology story here. One thing that anthropology has been interested in is the development of the human brain. And the human brain has been hard to study because it's all soft tissue and it doesn't fossilize. And so we don't see any fossil brains from 2 million years ago. And what they have done is use computerized tomography and generated images of the brain from the skulls that they have. They have used that to infer details of human brains and have got a pretty good idea of what they look like. Then they compared those images of the brains to great apes and modern humans, and the results suggest that the Homo sapiens and the Homo species developed a human-like brain about 1.7 million years ago. And at the same time that this was happening, there was a cognitive evolution occurring at the same time in early Homo culture and technology, which were becoming more complex. At the same time, our brain was getting bigger. What a surprise. And there are clear differences between ape brains and human brains. Compared to apes, Homo sapiens' brain is larger and its frontal lobes are organized in a different way. And this organization in the frontal lobe are the things that we use to do tool making, planning, and language, which sound pretty human things to me. And the results suggest that the Homo species first developed human-like brains about 1.7 million years ago in Africa. And one of the things that they see is this pattern of brain development and cultural development reflects the interdependent processes of the brain and culture co-evolution, where cultural innovation triggers changes in the brain's interconnectivity and ultimately in the way the frontal lobes are wired. And one thing that they saw from this that is interesting to me is it looks like these brain changes happened after homos migrated out of Africa, which again, uh, a long time ago, this in the same 1.7 million years ago, and the Homo species that were still in Africa at that time had ape-like brains. But when we got on the road and started exploring out of Africa, things became more challenging, and the benefit of having this big brain and being able to figure things out went way up as we were in unfamiliar environments. It is also interesting to me that they talk about the co-evolution of essentially brain and culture and technology. And in humans, those evolutions are inexorably intertwined. Now, one of my theories because of that is I think the available information on the computer and the smartphone, I think will end up giving humans a smaller brain because we're able to take stuff we were doing in our brain and put it offline in our phone, in our computer, so our brain won't need to be as big. And the brain is an energy hog. You know, it's 2% of the body mass and uses 20% of the body's energy.
Your theory is very interesting. I agree with it.
Well, it happened before with, homos have a smaller brain than Neanderthals. And one component of Homo sapiens is improved language and improved culture. And I believe that the brain is smaller because we took stuff offline that we had in our brain and we installed it in our culture.
Good point.
Now, these theories that you hear from me, many of them are my own crazed thinking. So if you go to try to find them in the book, you won't find them.
I like that one though.
Okay. You can keep it. Now, for the first time ever, people are getting transfusions from lab-grown blood cells. And an important clinical trial is now underway in the UK, and it's the first to study transfused red blood cells that are grown in the lab. These are grown from donated stem cells from humans. And if this is successful, this would be incredibly valuable for people with rare blood types, though it's still not going to increase the need for traditional blood donations until they get it to the point where they have it with much higher yields. This is a phase 1 trial, which means right now it's primarily designed to test the safety of the experiment. But one thing that has them excited is these lab-grown cells are theoretically fresher than the what you would get in a typical blood donation, which has a mix of newer and older blood cells. And on the average, red blood cells live for about 120 days. So the researchers are hoping that these lab-grown cells survive longer than the standard cells in their recipients. And if this trial is successful, it means that patients who currently require regular long-term blood transfusions will need fewer transfusions because again, if you start with new blood cells, the average blood, if it's a mix of old and new blood cells and they live to 120 days, you would guess the life of transfused blood on an average is about 60 days. And if you could make it 120 days, then you would need half as many transfusions. Now, scientists have been interested in manufacturing blood in the lab for a long time, but it turns out it has been challenging to replicate the natural process. These researchers, though, think they've found a more effective way to extract stem cells from donated blood and then to grow these cells in their mix of nutrients and to purify enough healthy and mature red blood cells from the resulting mix to be worth the effort. The process is much less efficient, though, than the human body can do. Currently, they need about 24 liters of their nutrient solution to filter out 2 tablespoons of red blood cells. So that's pretty low yield, 2 tablespoons from 24 liters. The human blood, 45% of the human blood is red blood cells. So they have to make enormous improvements in the yield of the process before it can be effective for more than just people in a special situation. And they do think, though, that eventually this technology will provide a more reliable and longer lasting supply of blood cells. This trial is only the start. It'll require, of course, more studies. And from where we are here, that's going to be 5 or 10 more years of development before we can start to see the first case of these being available for the public. But again, this shows what we are doing in the areas of biology and to be able to now take stem cells and use those stem cells to create red blood cells is another giant step forward.
I wonder at some point if they could combine this research with the genetic one that you had a couple stories ago and make the blood resistant from disease.
They could, but they still have to. I think the blood is so intertwined with the mechanisms of the cell that having them be resistant to disease is okay unless it means they're also resistant to the rest of the body.
Right. And I suppose they're making all the different blood types. Are they making A positive, B positive?
Again, that's part of what they think that will be an initial application for this is to be able to make rare blood types.
Right.
Where presently is limited.
Yep. Good idea.
You know, again, these are clever guys.
It's great.
Okay, that's what we got for this week.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, it was
Very
interesting.
good. And we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Adios.
Thank you, Richard.